Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? Where are you?
I'm at home. I'm not talking about football, and I'm especially not talking about VAR.
Well, it's only about twice this season, Kieran, that you've not been talking about football, whereas I've been sulking for most of it. So welcome to my world. We may have. I don't think we'll have recording issues, Kieran, because they do have the internet in Birmingham, where I am. I've been telling people all week that Ali and I have been going to our second little place up in Worcestershire. The truth is, we're in Ali's mum's house, clearing out her effects. God rest her soul. Straight after this pod, I'm starting on her petticoat drawer. Happy Easter, everybody.
Painting pictures with words there, Kevin.
Well, I think people like a bit of context. They don't like to think we're in a soulless studio like the newsagents or whatever that pod is or wherever else. They like to think that we are men of the people. Currently both in our pyjamas early on an Easter Sunday morning. We have to get this finished, Kieran, as I've got to watch the Pope. This is a middle-aged man. Because my mum would always phone up and say, "Did you see what His Holiness had to say?" I go, "I'll see it, Mum. I only just got out of bed." And I had to get 2 hours of bollocking. So I still instinctively have to watch what the Holy Father's got to say. We have a couple of news stories, Kieran, before our questions. The first being that I imagine Roberto De Zerbi has been taken off the shortlist of potential Spurs managers now. After kicking, I just love the fact that I was watching a match today and the commentator says, "Oh, people don't like to see scenes like this." They do.
We love it.
Love seeing scenes like that. And apparently, it kicked off right from they refused to shake hands before the game even started. Is that right?
I believe there was an act of disrespect in an Italian league match 18 years ago. I thought, right, I hold a grudge, but De Zerbi, man alive. He's an angry man.
Football people are a strange breed. You can try and break their legs. You can probably go behind their back with their misses, but show any sign of disrespect, and they don't like that, do they? They really don't. But it was just it's two angry men at the end as well. I love the fact that Tottenham's manager, when the commentator said, "Did you think you deserved to win that game?" Because whereas Roy Hodgson would have gone, "No, we got lucky with that," as Sean Dyche did, but instead Tottenham's manager just went, "Yeah, we did. Yeah, we were a better team." And the commentator did exactly what I would have did and agreed with him. Right. But anyway, that brings us nicely, Kieran, to Italy and to Spain, who I predict are possibly only a year ahead of us in making a big decision.
Yes, this is in respect of front of shirt deals, and both Italy and Spain have effectively confirmed, and they have been talking about this for a while, that they're not going to have gambling adverts. Now, where this leaves us with crypto and NFT style adverts, we're not sure, because we've always argued that is effectively gambling with a small g. But it is the government authorities effectively taking a stand on this. And in relation to the Premier League, it does look as if there's going to be a voluntary ban, but that's going to be tapered in over a few years. And my view has always been that this actually is advantageous to the bigger clubs who don't have gambling sponsors, because they are a more global brand, and therefore it's negative from a financial point of view for the smaller clubs. If it is just going to be a front of shirt ban, then that increases the value of your sleeve sponsors, which and you know, once you start to read the small print, you go, oh, hold on, this isn't quite as it seems. And is it addressing the broader issues in relation to gambling? It's tokenism. So it's not a comprehensive, well thought out policy.
Two things, Kieran. First of all, are Spain and Italy giving their clubs the same sort of notice period that we're talking about here? The press are assuming there's going to be a 3-year lead up to this. And in terms of how much this will cost football in Spain and Italy, if Bet365, for example, were to sponsor Liverpool or Manchester United, would that cost them considerably more than it would to sponsor Barcelona or Milan?
I've not seen the small print of the Spain or Italy deals, but given that clubs will have signed contracts with their sponsors, you would expect there to be some form of flexibility. And most changes are normally graduated. In relation to a sponsor for Manchester United or Liverpool, a front of shirt deal for those two clubs, we're talking in the region of 40 to 50 million pounds. It's more than 50 million pounds, I think, in respect of Manchester United. Barcelona are probably able to trump them. Barcelona are a pretty amazing brand in their own rights. So they are certainly popular. The reason why the gambling companies don't particularly want to touch them is they just want to have somebody seeing their eyeballs. And also, if we take a look at the vast majority of front of shirt deals that we presently have, they're for non-UK based front of shirt sponsors, many of which are aimed at the Asian markets, who have white label websites effectively in the UK. So again, you can't actually bet if you're based in the UK with some of these sponsors, and they're all linked to a company based in the Isle of Man, which is now coming in for a bit more scrutiny, and that's got to be welcomed.
This next story, Kieran, we were meant to do on our actual news pod the other day, but I completely forgot. Even though some instinct, Kieran, of yours kicked in, and you actually said before we started, which is the closest we get to preparation after the usual 15 minutes of gossip, you actually said, don't forget to add in this story, and which I took as, don't do this story. And to be perfectly honest, the only reason I remembered to put it back in this morning and then check with you whether or not I'd done it the other day was that I'm in the city concerned, by which people now tell it's about one of two clubs.
Yes. It's not Aston Villa. So therefore that narrows it down to Birmingham City. And this is in respect of three gentlemen who have failed the owners and directors test, sort of, even though they were never officially an owner or a director. But I think it's fair to say that they were operating as shadow owners. So this is to do with a company called Maxco, which consisted of the former Barcelona striker, Maxi Lopez, whose only connection to Birmingham, I guess, could be the bull ring. That's pretty tentative. A businessman called Paul Richardson, and the former Charlton Athletic chief executive Matt Southall, who, in my opinion, one of the big parasites of modern day football. And if people are saying, "Well, why am I being so harsh?" I'd recommend that they read the Charlton dossier, which is a lovingly crafted and forensic examination of Matt Southall's activities there. If you then talk to fans from Rochdale with regards to a hostile takeover in which Matt Southall was connected, and now here. So they set up this company called Maxco, and the aim was to buy Birmingham City for £35 million, and the deal collapsed. Now, there are big issues in respect of trying to trace who Birmingham's owners actually are. But what appeared to be the case is that although the deal had not gone through, they had installed their people at the club and they were effectively running it on a day-to-day basis. So what we've seen is that the EFL have given them bans from any involvement with an EFL club. And I think Lopez has had it's just a 1-month ban, Richardson 2 months, Southall 6 months. I think they should have replaced that with years. Because his breaches were deemed to be the most significant. So it's messy. We don't know what's going to happen in respect of Birmingham. It's a club which does need a change at the top. But I always say to people, don't fall into the trap of thinking that change is the same as improvement. Yeah. And it wouldn't if Matt Southall was involved based on historic records. It wouldn't have necessarily been an improvement. So that's why I'm not going in 2-footed here. I'm just cautious given leopards, spots, etc.
Birmingham City, Kieran, are a club. I have a lot of. I'm not going to say I haven't got any fondness for any other club except Palace, but they are a club. I know quite a few Birmingham City fans through my time up here in this wonderful city, and it's a club I worry about, Kieran, because they have been swirling around our podcast for quite some time now. But for those worried Birmingham fans, can we just confirm there's been no sanction against the club by the EFL? It's just these 3 individuals that no longer have any part of the club anyway.
That's right. They are no longer involved on a shadow basis or an actual basis. It's there to try to protect the game. And unfortunately, football is an industry that does need protection. And Birmingham are one of those clubs that must have kicked a black cat a few times because you go back to Carson Young and then the current owners and these potential people, and there's a few other fly-by-nights. And of course, our very good friend Lawrence Bassini once said that he was going to buy the club. And Lawrence has said that when that deal goes through, he is actually going to come on the podcast.
Yeah. So I think you and I will be in the home by then, Kieran.
Yes,
singing Sex Pistols songs around the old piano, I imagine. For those of our listeners, Kieran, thinking, Kieran really has got in hard today, isn't he? Parasite, 2-footed tackles. He is upset by that Spurs game. It's more to do with the fact that producer Guy has gone on holiday somewhere Caribbean-y, I imagine, knowing producer Guy, and uttered what I think are probably the most famous last words ever, which was like, "Can you two sort it out while I'm away? Just, can you edit it, anything that needs to..." Yeah, of course, boss. Absolutely. On to our questions, Kieran, and they are the usual eclectic mix. All of them are very interesting questions. One in particular I thought was a fascinating one. The first one comes from Gonzalo Pardo, and I suspect this is a question that both our respective sons would have more knowledge about than we do, Kieran, it being slightly generational. But Gonzalo Pardo says, I wanted to ask a question regarding why and how football teams monetize their esports teams, which is becoming increasingly huge, Kieran. It's being shown live on TV now, for example. I've seen that some football teams, says Gonzalo, have their own esports teams, for example, Celtic, Man City, PSG, and in Chile, half of the teams has an esport team competing in football like EA, FIFA, PES, and non-football like Fortnite, LOL. I'm just reading letters out here, Kieran. CS.
I thought LOL was laugh out loud.
That's what I thought, Kieran, but let's not say that with our children in earshot, really. Not that my one will be out of bed for not this bank holiday for a while. How does it generate revenue for the clubs?
Right. If we take a look at where football clubs do generate money from historically, it's broadcasting deals, ticket sales, and commercial. And those have sort of come to a not a shuddering halt, but the opportunities for growth are potentially limited. By having an esports team and tapping into the metaverse, the likes of TikTok, and Instagram and so on, there is the opportunity to monetize via streaming. Now, this is an uncertain market, but just because it's an uncertain doesn't mean that football clubs should avoid it, because otherwise there's the danger of potentially being too late. And I mean, I remember back in 92, 93, when the Premier League did make a big effort to sell the international TV rights, when, if you think at the time, English football was pretty much a pariah of the whole, certainly within Europe. And that proved to be an inspired decision. And now we're at the place where international rights exceed those of the domestic TV deals. So as far as the clubs are concerned, there is the opportunity, first of all, to build brand awareness. If your esports club is successful, then there's the chance of potentially selling merchandise to the people who are watching this. So, that's another income stream. There will be adverts during the streaming. You might, in a longer term, be able to start to negotiate broadcast deals. And these broadcast deals, they don't necessarily come under the Premier League umbrella. So therefore, and certainly as far as the bigger clubs are concerned, they've always wanted to have their own rights. And at present, they've got their own rights for reserve games and so on, which don't really tend to make any significant difference. But there is certainly a huge market out there in respect of gaming, and building a more global audience from the existing global audience is tapping into different demographics, and on the back of that, being able to engage. And the new oil is supposed to be data, and the more data you have about people who have got some form of connection with the club and the club brand, that data can be sold and it can be monetized. So I think that's how the clubs are looking at this. It's all digital in nature. But there is talk about, and I think this probably does happen. And let's face it, we are not the target demographic, and our knowledge here is limited. But in respect of some of the big matches, and when you get into the finals of these competitions, effectively these can take place in arenas where you get you get a few thousand people turning up, and there'll be big screens, and the esport players themselves are celebrities in their own right, in an environment with which people like myself and you, we're just not familiar. But I think it's not ignorance on our behalf. It's just that we are not those people who are being aimed at. But there is certainly, in terms of influencer markets and so on, there is the opportunity to make money on the back of this.
It's just that our brains are not big enough anymore, Kieran. A very good friend of mine, comedian Jeff Green, who says the older he gets, the less inclined he is to move his head, because he's fairly convinced every time he nods or shakes his head, a little bit more information disappears out of his ears. Which is, it's exactly, I find this, I'm like a toddler trying to retain information. If I don't write it down, Kieran, it doesn't, as we know, like Birmingham City news stories. It's interesting, talking of those broadcasting deals back in the 90s. Remember that nostalgia pod we talked about doing as a one-off?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I've been reading this really interesting book, a very funny book by a chap called Ned Bolting, who does more cycling stuff now, a very respected cycling broadcaster, but for 20 years was at the coalface for Sky and BBC. But he was part of the ITV Digital broadcast deal with the EFL. I didn't realise, Kieran, how disastrous that was. I mean, I knew it was swirling around in the back of my head somewhere, but that's something we need to talk about at some stage. Perhaps we're hoping to get somebody from the EFL on the show soon. And it seems to me the EFL is still struggling to recover from something that happened all that long ago. So let's not get into details now, Kieran, but I just found it really, really interesting. Daniel Hill has our next question. And Daniel Hill has the same sort of, I wouldn't say it's an obsession, but it's a question and a subject that a lot of our listeners are very interested in. and it concerns the tax that footballers pay. Daniel Hill says, I know players get around a lot of tax with image rights, but I'm interested to know that if a player is on, say, a £100,000 a week contract, are they paying the full income tax on this, or do they set themselves up as self-employed contractors, or does the club pay it and the £100,000 is net? Now, this is something, Kieran, that's been in the media a lot recently about high-paid entertainers, some of whom in the football world, but it's something that a lot of our listeners are convinced that footballers are spending a lot of their time trying to find ways that are paying the correct tax, which I'm not sure is entirely the case.
No. In respect of this, and we had this discussion on a recent show, it's a classic case of don't upset the bear when it comes to dealings with HMRC.
Yeah.
A football player does sign a contract of employment with a football club, and there is nothing to stop the player at the same time, via their representatives, usually, setting up a company to manage their image rights, and then a proportion of the pre-agreed deal goes to the image rights company. Now, HMRC sort of say no more than 20%. Okay, again, don't take the piss, is the mantra. And that is likely to be more accepted in the Premier League than it is if you are a centre half at Doncaster Rovers. And that's no besmirching the present centre half of Doncaster Rovers, but they are unlikely to have a profile through which their signature, them standing next to a product, is going to bring in substantial amounts of money, and therefore can be allocated as part of the club's ability to generate extra revenues. Now, the advantage of that is that if you are paid £100,000 a week, and let's say that's a gross, on the vast majority of that, you are paying tax at 45%, and that's therefore effectively 45 grand a week going off in tax. If 20% of that goes to your image rights company, it means that the player is effectively receiving a weekly or a monthly payroll amount based on income of £80,000 a week, and the image rights company is receiving money from the football club. The image rights company, because it is a company, pays corporation tax. It used to be at 19%. It is going up. The government is increasing corporation tax rates. But that's going to be substantially lower. And then the profits of the image rights company can be distributed to either the player, sensibly, when the player retires, or if the players wants to get the cash now, if they've got any sense, what they will do is that they will set up partner, close relatives as directors and shareholders of that company, and they will pay a dividend out to those people. And if those people are not in full-time employment, again, you've got tax-free allowance each year. You've got your first set of earnings of being at 19-20%, and so on. So it's a way of organising your affairs to reduce tax. As for is this moral or ethical? I think you've got to set this aside. It's legal, provided, as I've said before, you don't take the mickey. And I know people, or some people, get very angry about this. We all do tax avoidance. Many people have an ISA. That's a way of avoiding paying tax. It's perfectly legitimate. It's actually, in fact, it was set up by the government as a means of encouraging people to save and to put money aside. So these schemes are allowed. HMRC will review them. There have been some historical investigations, but provided, I think, the individuals concerned as players and their representatives just do it sensibly, that's how it would work. And it would result in a net position of a reduction in tax being paid.
Putting image rights aside, Kieran, Would there be any player on, and let's take £100,000 a week as the starting point for the biggest earners? And I know there are players who earn more than that, but would there be any player on that amount of money who is just an employee of a club having their tax deducted at source? Or all players at that level all have set up their own production company essentially and be paid through that?
Well, we can't talk about an individual's personal circumstances, but players have agents, players have representatives. And one of the things that players will be saying to them is, are you looking after my finances? And I think it would be a dereliction of duty at that level of remuneration for an agent or representative to say, oh, bollocks to this, mate, let's just go and pay it all through PAYE.
Right, okay.
So I think it's highly unlikely, but you cannot say with any degree of, I cannot give 100% certain guarantee.
The trouble is, Kieran, as we found out recently, discussing the Craig Bellamy case and others, that young footballers aren't probably thinking about that, aren't probably thinking that their agent will be doing the best. They're just assuming it because they don't have the financial knowledge because they're not taught it at school. And so Jamie Moss has a question, Kieran, I think is a really interesting concept, and it's one that's never occurred to me before, and those are questions that I really like. Jamie says, it seems to me that in the long term, women's football will lose out by all the top teams being directly associated to men's teams. For example, a Bristol Rovers fan is unlikely to follow Bristol City women, but may follow an unassociated Bristol women's side, creating a larger potential fan base. Is there any way of considering this potential future revenue impact? I think that's a very interesting point, Kieran.
I think Jamie is exactly spot on. And remember, there are separate teams in London, in Glasgow, who do compete in football.
In Durham, in Lewis as well. So.
Yep. I think the issue here is Jamie's keywords are long term. And in the long term, I absolutely agree with him. The problem that we have is in the short term, women's football is losing money. So if we take a look at the accounts of the big clubs that have been coming out in the WSL, they are all losing money. They are losing money, a seven figures amount. So we're talking, a million, even £2 or £3 million is being lost on clubs that are bringing in only, they're bringing in sort of potentially 4 or 5 million in total. And a lot of that 4 or 5 million is connected to deals with the parent club. So if we had Bristol United as a club in the women's game representing the city, the challenge would be, if the club wants to stay in that division, it needs to pay the going rate. It needs to have a competitive budget. But unfortunately, the women's game isn't generating enough money for the club to break even. Therefore, somebody has to fund those losses. Now, if we could find the equivalent of an Abramovich, Steve Parish, Tony Bloom to come in and say, right, well, actually, I want nothing to do with the local men's teams. This is a separate project. I think this is an absolutely fantastic idea. And I'm willing to underwrite those losses in the short term with a view to building up the strength of the club and the brand, representing the city, targeting a different demographic. And I was at Wembley on Thursday night watching the Lionesses play Brazil. Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant night out. Everybody had a good time. Very noticeable change of atmosphere compared to watching England men's team. And I'm not falling down sort of, everybody that goes to watch the England men's team is aggressive and so on. But it was a far more family atmosphere. And you could build up over a period of time a decent sized audience for people who want to attend. But what happens in the short term in respect of underwriting those losses, I think is the challenge. Whereas by having a women's team which is linked to the men's team, The women's team's losses don't count towards FFP, so therefore the men's teams or the parent team is willing to absorb those losses, and also it has the funds to provide to cover for those particular losses. And I think that's the challenge that we have in the women's game at present. And there are other challenges as well, as the game is trying to grow, but not making the same, it's not mistakes, but the same historical issues that we've seen in the men's game, which is being dominated by a relatively small number of clubs. If that happens in the WSL, the problem I think that's going to arise is that you will follow Crystal Palace forever. I will follow Brighton forever, regardless of what division we're in. If we play Chelsea or Manchester United and we concede 5 or 6, Manchester City rather than Chelsea, I think these days, then you take it. In the women's game, if that happens too often, how are you going to build up a support base if you just become cannon fodder for the bigger teams? And we've already started to see in the WSL the same names at the top of the WSL that exist at the top of the men's game. And I think that's going to be another problem, because the support base for the smaller clubs isn't big enough for them to put up with that week in, week out.
Yeah, it's the demographic at the moment that's part of the problem. A very good friend of mine, Chirpy, a Palace fan, known him for years, love him dearly. His daughter plays for one of the Palace women's teams. She's tiny, she's fearless. I think you probably met her in the Portons. She dislocated her finger playing for Palace a couple of weeks ago and put it back herself. I know, that's exactly the reaction of about 25 blokes in the pub. She came in, she'd been hit in the face by a ball, and then she went, "Oh yeah, as I fell over, I dislocated my finger." And we went, "What did you do?" She went, "Put it back." We were, but it's interesting talking to Chris about, because he's followed the women's game more closely than I have, partly because his daughter is so good at it. But his theory is that at the moment, the demographic at a women's game is very different. And as you say, at Wembley, you'll have a lot more young people. He said the thing is, what women's football needs to do is get through the next decade, so that all those 7, 8, 9-year-olds who are going now will continue to go. But by that time, we'll have disposable income, and we'll be encouraging more people to go. So I think that's an interesting take on it. It's just, if women's football, I mean, take away the top sides who are doing all right, as long as you don't compare it to the men's game. But just for clubs like Palace, who aren't the big team in women's football, for clubs like Durham, like Lewis, like London Lionesses as well, they can just get through that next decade, get this generation grown up and spending money, it might be all right.
Yeah.
But it's just getting through that decade, isn't it?
It's short-term pain for long-term gain.
Yeah.
But who is going to fund the short-term pain?
Yeah.
Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breast, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Max Healy has this question. Max Healy says, in a deal involving a player swap, does it make more financial sense for the club selling the higher valued player to take a player in a swap deal, or to keep the sale of their player and the purchase of the lower valued player in the deal separate?
Right. For the purposes of registering the player, the deals have to be shown separately because that has implications for the profits on the players being sold. And remember, we've often spoken about the Arthur and the Pjanic deal as an example of what can happen when things go a bit crazy. So from the accounting point of view, you have to show these as two separate. So let's say that we've got two players. One is valued at 20 million, the other at 15, you will have to show those as two additions for the respective clubs, because otherwise you've got inconsistency in terms of the way that you deal with other player registrations. There could be some tax issues arising, but I don't think so. It could be that if you want to reduce your tax, let's say that both clubs are profitable. I appreciate people are now looking at me and think I've gone crazy for the idea of a profitable football club, but what you could do, and there's nothing to stop this, is to say that, well, under those circumstances, if both clubs are already profitable, the last thing you want to do is to report profits from player sales. And therefore, what I would do under those circumstances is that we would agree that you sell me player A for 5 million and I sell you player B for £1. And therefore, we've got lower income, lower profits, and lower tax. That would be where it's effectively doing Mac's suggestion. And I know Max, I'd like to say congratulations to Max on an absolutely fantastic Brighton Marathon last weekend, by the way. He ran it in less than 4 hours, which is an absolutely superb time. As somebody that has run the Brighton Marathon myself and vowed never to run it again when I finished it, which advice, of course, which in true bloke style I didn't take. Yeah. But they're under normal circumstances, you probably put them through at market value. If you want to improve things for FFP purposes, you inflate both by, let's say, 10, 20, 30 million. And if you want to reduce your tax affairs, you would deflate both. So you'd have to look at the specific circumstances relating to the two clubs.
Yeah, Max may have done a good job, Kieran, running the Brighton Marathon, but has he ever put back his own dislocated finger? When he's done that, he'd let it come back and I'll start sponging. He's not a Brighton fan by any chance, is he?
Oh, Max is, right, absolutely a Brighton fan.
Well, none of this will happen then. I'm going to get it. I can't get it edited out. Guys in the... Damn, you've lured me in. There are all these questions this week from Brighton fans, Kieran. Have I fallen for a trick? Hugh Roberts has a question that we have sort of discussed, talked around it, but I don't think we ever came up with a definitive answer. But Hugh Roberts says, with the World Cup being staged in winter last year, did that have an effect on replica kit sales, do we know? Because surely fans are more likely to buy shirts in summer.
No, there's no evidence in terms of kit sales. And remember, our summer isn't everybody's summer. So there are different geographic issues to take into consideration. The biggest drivers tend to be, has the country qualified for the World Cup? How big is its natural football audience? How well does it start the tournament? You often see a big pickup on sales if you get through the group stages, and then from sort of the casual fan's eye, how outstanding are the kits? And I remember some of the Nigeria kits historically have been absolutely amazing. One of my big regrets is still not buying the USA kits from the 1994 World Cup, which were I know they were stars and stripes, but looking back at them, you think, wow, that's quite an amazing kit. But that doesn't tend to be the biggest driver. It's very much if the country is involved, there will still be a big tick up in terms of England, Wales, whoever the domestic nations are going to be, and that goes throughout the rest of the world as well.
Yes, and also, as we've discussed before, you have this strange phenomenon where fans of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, the Republic, and Germany are more likely to buy retro shirts than it seems any other country in the world, which is an interesting one. But again, that's for the Nostalgia Pod. Now, Kieran, I use the word antsy. I'm never entirely sure what the word antsy means. But you know how antsy I get about just people just giving us their first names. Well, I'm slightly confused now because our next question, we have a first name, but also a location. So there's very, very little point going on a witness protection scheme if you tell us where you live, which I'm sure are words that Uncle Terry told you when you were dandling on his knee as a 3-year-old. Kieran, my son, let me just tell you this. If you're ever on a witness protection scheme, and you will be. So Ben from Bury St Edmunds says, hello, Ben. Hello, Bury St Edmunds, beautiful part of the world. Ben from Bury St Edmunds, and this is discussing a club that we spoke to, the owner, and we've spoken about, and in general, we seem to think they're a soundly run club. But Ben says, now we've seen Ipswich's first set of accounts and heavy losses under the new ownership of the Arizona Investment Fund, ORG, how will ORG turn these losses around and make a profit, as they said they will?
Right. I will tell you after the show exactly who Ben from Bury St Edmunds is.
Okay.
So somebody you might know. So that's intriguing. Now, in respect of Ipswich, these are record losses under the new owners. And again, looking at Ipswich historically, so I've been through all the accounts all the way through to, I've actually looked at the last 15 years of Ipswich's accounts this morning. How many other people have said that on Easter Sunday? They're too busy. They're too busy looking forward to the Pope's speech, I suspect. But Ipswich have lost £170,000 a week over the course of the last decade. An incredible amount of money, and yet. If you talk to Ipswich fans about the previous Ipswich owner, Marcus Evans, a breakdown in the relation there. The new owners have come in. They have put more money in. I think is it 8 victories on the trot with 8 clean sheets?
Yeah.
They're on a phenomenal run. Absolutely amazing run at present. So fair play to them for that. As far as finding a profit on a business which has lost money non-stop and has paid out wages which have exceeded revenue in 14 years out of the last 15. It's very difficult to see how that can be done. And yet you could say exactly the same about Chelsea. And what we have here is the so-called find a bigger fool theory.
Yeah.
What you do is that you sell a football club not as a business, but as an opportunity. You sell the football club as a trophy asset and you extol all the virtues to a new prospective owner. So let's, for example, if Ipswich are promoted to the Championship next season, I would be touting the club around to somebody as saying, we are 9 months away from the Premier League. If you buy the club now, you are not that far away from hosting Manchester United and Liverpool and Manchester City and having Haaland and Rashford and all of these iconic players coming to your ground. And you sell it on that basis. Because if you look at the fundamentals, if you think it's bad losing money in League One, it's nothing compared to the monies which are lost in the Championship. And, I gave that figure of £170,000 a week. By Championship standards, that's actually quite low. And I think that was part of the issue that Ipswich fans had, was they were in that sort of purgatory position in which the money being spent by the owner was £9 to £10 million a year. But that wasn't enough to really make the club competitive in terms of trying to compete for a promotion or playoff spot. And therefore you had that sort of bottom third of the table annual fight until gravity eventually catches up with you and you get relegated.
Ben from Bury St Edmunds, is it Ed Sheeran?
No, not quite.
Where the slight difference is, though, Kieran, and we have sort of discussed this before, is my understanding is that ORG, for example, there are state pension funds who are part of or invested in ORG. So do they not have a responsibility to make a profit, or does it not matter whether they make a profit on a weekly basis as long as they make a profit when they sell the club after 3 years, 5 years, whatever?
You're absolutely right with that second conclusion. If you are an investor, you have a portfolio normally of low risk, medium risk, and high risk investments. And the high risk investments potentially are going to incur losses, but it's it's gambling. It's the same as sticking money on a horse, and you do exactly that same strategy, or some gamblers do. And what will have happened here is that ORG will have investments in risk-free areas, which is effectively government bonds issued by Switzerland and the United States government and so on. If the United States government goes bust, then there are bigger issues in the world than a individual pension fund losing money. So they will have a range of investments with various elements of risk attached. This will be clearly more of the moonshot investments, but as we've seen, Ipswich can play fantastic football on the pitch. They've tighter than a gnat's chuff at the back in terms of conceding goals. And if they manage to repeat this next season, then they could be in the Premier League. And then the owners will be in a position to sell the club for, I would say, a minimum of £150 million. And that's where you make your profit.
I'm still heartbroken that the Drum and Monkey pub shut down. That was the best away pub in the country. It was brilliant, but I still, they should have the same protection, pubs like that, as cathedrals do. I love a cathedral, but somewhere like the Drum and Monkey should have been a Grade 1 listed building. It was, and the staff. It's fantastic. I'm even more confused by this next name, Kieran, because we've got a surname, but just an initial for the first names. This next question comes from L. Robert. Now, I don't know whether it's just somebody called Robert, and producer guy on his way to the airport just pressed the wrong key and added an L. For all I know, this could be the rap name of my accountant, Bobby Numbers. But who knows? But I doubt it. Look, but L. Robert's question could be a bullfighter. I don't know. L. Robert says that would have been a great joke in the 70s. Never mind. This question is about Champions League payouts and whether the Champions League is actually good for Europe. In Hungary, for example, Ferencváros have won 5 of the last 7 league seasons. In Serbia, Red Star have won 7 of the last 9. In Austria, Red Bull Salzburg have won 9 in a row, 7 out of 10 for Legia Warsaw in Poland, and so on, he says. But Robert says, I think we get the point. Given how much money is available in the Champions League compared to the budgets of clubs in these leagues, is the tournament actually a good thing for smaller countries, or are UEFA payouts simply solidifying top clubs to the point that their financial advantage will be nearly impossible for anyone to overcome? I suspect I know what your answer will be, Kieran, but I think we can refer back here to Jamie's question about women's football, because you could argue that the same thing is already beginning to happen in women's football, couldn't you?
Yes. What we are having here in European football is a procession. If we take a look at Hungary and Ferencváros, in the most recent UEFA financial report that I've got my hands on, which is for 2021, Ferencváros made €18 million from participation in the group stages of the Champions League. Now, they were in a group which consisted of them and Juventus and Barcelona as 2 other clubs. So I think we know what the results were going to be. So they are the make-weights of those divisions. But I think the difference is, and going back to what we were talking about, the women's game, is that fans of Ferencváros will turn up to see their teams play Barcelona and Juventus, even though they anticipate a defeat, because it's the opportunity to see some global footballing superstars. So that €18 million, and if we take a look at Austria, Austria made €34 million in their campaign, gives them such a financial advantage over the other clubs in the domestic league, is that you do end up with this position. And it happens not that far away. If we take a look at what's happened in Scotland, I think somebody quoted me a figure yesterday that the last time that either Celtic or Rangers dropped a point to anybody apart from Celtic or Rangers was something like the 18th of October.
Wow.
So, and you look at that, you go, well, that's, first of all, you've still got to go and turn up and win, but it is indicative of a league where finishing second is seen as failure for those two clubs. But in respect of some of these other leagues, we now just have a situation where it's one club, and remember, Celtic have had 9 in a row, 10 and 11. It looks like, I think effectively they've now won the SPFL following their victory yesterday, and they will be absolutely delighted by that. But then you add in the European money, and that just solidifies the existing gaps. And there is an organisation called A22 who is trying to promote Super League via stealth.
Yeah.
And what it is doing is saying, well, actually, guys, we're proposing a sort of European league in which you'll be paying 14 games a season, and the impact of that will be to further dilute competitiveness as far as domestic football is concerned. So I think L. Robert makes a very valid point. European football is aspirational, and that is great. And let me put my hand on my heart. As a Brighton fan, we are very giddy. And as one of my friends said yesterday, I don't care who we end up playing against. We're going to spend Thursday nights going to cities which I never had any intention or desire to visit in the whole of my life. And it's going to be one of the greatest nights of my life. And that's the parrot. But then, for us, it's going to be, being realistic, it's probably going to be a one-off. And we'll have a few games, and we'll have those memories. And it's exactly the same for QPR fans. You think about the success that they've had in Fulham had under Roy Hodgson.
Indeed.
A few years ago. And they will say, it's football is all about memories and shared experience, and it'll be absolutely wonderful. But from a financial point of view, it's not good where you are in one of those countries that only has one place in the Champions League, and that could either be through the preliminary rounds or through the group stages. It is so lucrative, it creates a huge gap.
With regards to the identity of Ben from Bury St Edmunds, could he be the chief executive of Arizona Investment Fund, ORG, who is actually asking you how to turn these losses around and make a profit?
I think if he was, it would be more OMG in terms of his response.
You imagine that at the annual general meeting. It's like, wow, what are you doing about these figures? I've sent a question into a podcast. Right. Our penultimate question comes from Dylan Desir. Apologies, Dylan, if I've pronounced your surname incorrectly. Dylan's question is about international transfers. And he says, is the contract always made in the buying club's jurisdiction, or does this vary? I was reading an article which said that in the transfer for Rafinha, Leeds inserted a penalty clause into the contract if Barcelona did not pay part of the transfer fee on time. However, as I know from my law studies, penalty clauses are legally unenforceable in English law. Very interesting, Kieran.
Right. It would normally be, there tends to be standard contracts between clubs because they have to be approved by the individual football associations. With regards to penalty clauses as such are probably, the law is messy here, and let's face it, we are not lawyers as either. But having a clause in a contract which says upon late payment there will be an interest charge, that is probably enforceable. It's not a penalty clause, it's simply part of the overall terms and conditions. So I think it would normally be in the books of the seller, because that's what you're doing. You're talking about one of your assets, transferring ownership of one of your assets, which is a registration certificate, to another club. But ultimately, it will all be bound by both UEFA and FIFA regulations.
I suppose if you're doing a transfer deal with Barcelona, Kieran, it would be remiss not to put in some sort of penalty clause for late payment, wouldn't it?
It certainly would, yes. To be fair, I think they have made most of them to date, but not all.
Right, okay. Our last question comes from Mark Last, which is, well done, producer guy. That just made me chuckle, the fact that the last question comes from Mark Last. I apologise, Mark. I imagine you've had to put up with that most of your your life. Mark last has a question. There's so many of our listeners are just obsessed with finding ways around FFP and villainous club owners, basically. That Mark says, would it be possible for a wealthy club owner to use loans to disguise their finances? For example, could a club take out a £1 billion loan from a bank, have that counted as FFP income, and then the wealthy owner pays the loan back immediately? This way the club gets an injection of cash and can offset their losses, and the owner can pay it off as they would anyway.
Right. This wouldn't work, Mark.
Right. Okay.
Because the £1 billion loan from a bank would not count towards FFP.
Okay.
It would simply be treated as a cash, and just because a business receives cash is not the same as income. So as far as the football world is concerned, it's income from, we said earlier, broadcast, commercial, match day, and also profits on player sales. So therefore, that particular cunning scheme would not work.
Okay. I'm sorry about that, Mark. Especially if you are a billionaire club owner who, again, like the owners of ORG, are using this as a way of getting free financial advice from Kieran. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, cash or income, then please go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com and we will do our best to answer it eventually. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell before he goes off to the internet and books his European tour for next season.
Well, thank you everybody for your continued support of the show. It's now just turned 11 o'clock, so I know Kevin will be keeping an eye out for the Pontiff in the background.
Well, this is a Methodist household, Kieran, so it'll be the first time the Pope's been allowed in. So I should be very much looking forward to if it starts thunder and lightning, we'll know what's happened.
There's many ways of supporting the show, and just a quick reminder, we are having some live shows, one in Leicester in May,
Indeed.
And one in Plymouth in June. And keep your ears peeled. We hope to be able to make an announcement sometime about some more in due course. But there's another way of supporting the show, and that's to go onto your app and to give us a review. And it helps us in the charts, the number of reviews and so on. The guests like to see that the club, that the sort of podcast does have some uptake as well. And by all accounts, it doesn't matter what you say on the podcast. So you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Brian Johnson, the mangled testicle singer from AC/DC, and Brian Johnston, the former cricket commentator on Test Match Special. And I would tune in for that. I think they're both two absolutely fantastic individuals.
Do you know what? I bet they'd get on quite well.
They would be brilliant together.
They would. What a singer, what a broadcaster as well. Is either of those Ben from Bury St Edmunds, by the way?
Not quite.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.